Umar from Sheffield, England. Would a class of Paul Heyman, Lex Luger, and Bray Wyatt be enough for next year's Hall of Fame? Or would you want more people inducted with them? I think that they should headline with Bray Wyatt, and I think it's perfect because Philadelphia is where he returned at Extreme Rules last year. And he got that huge ovation. So I think it would be a very appropriate place for him to go in. Paul Heyman should go in Philly. I think that would be a good place as well. I don't know that he wants to. It may not be his choice. But he should go in. I would love to see Brock Lesnar do the induction. Because how wild would it be to see Brock Lesnar giving an induction speech for somebody else at the Hall of Fame? But they could also have Roman Reigns do it. Either one of them would be, I think, a big enough name. Lex Luger going in, I think, would be fine. It would just feel wrong for him to be in and not Elizabeth. But putting them in the same class, though, I think that would just be a terrible look. And I would add to that, too. I'm looking ahead now that you mentioned the Hall of Fame to 2024. I think Bam Bam Bigelow could go in. And I'd like to see Demolition go in. And I know why they haven't put them in up to this point, but I think it's time. It's time for Triple H. Now that Vince McMahon's out of the way, it's time for Triple H and Nick Khan to make that situation right before it's too late. Batista still has to get his induction. William Regal will absolutely go in. Neither of those have to be next year. Ronald from Denton, Texas. We know Raw and SmackDown could land on separate networks again, but could they air simultaneously and go head-to-head? Obviously, there are tons of logistical complications that prevent them from even thinking about it, but with business the way it is today, they may be able to spread themselves out without spreading too thin. They run the risk of splitting the audience, but this issue seems to be a moot point as the NFL, NBA, and other sports leagues air games simultaneously on opposing networks. Airing the two shows head-to-head can astroturf a war. I'm not sure what that means, but astroturf a war between the brands and make the brand split meaningful. For instance, Roman's absence would be even more conspicuous to the point of forcing him to show up more often. Plus, if Vince somehow returns again, he may indeed ruin one show, but the other would be spared. Is this a possibility? That's some very twisted logic there. I think you're being a little too optimistic about that part. No, it is not a possibility. And I hate even the thought of Raw and SmackDown running head-to-head because of how much of a headache it would be for me. They're never, ever going to recreate the magic of the Monday Night War by competing with themselves. It's never going to happen, and I see no upside for them or whoever their network partners are going to end up being, or their streaming partner, as it were. I see no upside for them to cut their own audience in half like that. That's not what they're paying WWE millions of dollars for. For the NBA and the NFL, it's a scheduling issue more than anything else. They only have a finite number of dates to air games. Some games only air in specific markets anyway. It's not the same thing. I get what you're trying to say, but it's apples and oranges. And the idea that Roman Reigns would have to start appearing on TV more often because Raw might get, half a ratings point more than SmackDown, that's just not how this works. If they were in a war with another promotion, then maybe. Maybe they would want Roman on TV more often. But no, Roman Reigns is not going to make one appearance more than he otherwise would, even if the shows ran head-to-head. King Razor from Jackson, Mississippi. If you had to buy, sell, and rent on male and female duos, Santino Marella and Beth Phoenix, Eddie Guerrero and Chyna, or Rhea Ripley and Dominik Mysterio, who would it be? I am buying on Rhea and Dom. Even though they are clearly a takeoff on Eddie and Chyna, right down to Dominik calling Rhea mommy. And Eddie used to call Chyna his mamacita. I love the Rhea and Dominik pairing and those segments where they would interrupt Rey Mysterio on the holidays and they beat him up in his house and all that stuff. That was great. That was great. That was gold. They're actually very similar in that the Eddie and Chyna pairing was the first time that we really, if you think about it, first time that we really got to see Eddie Guerrero delve into the character aspect of things that heavily. And it opened up a lot of people's eyes to how funny and how entertaining he could be, other than him just being a great wrestler and a great worker. Similar with Dominik, it was the first time with Rhea and the Judgment Day stuff that we really got to see him come out of his shell and tap into the character aspect of things. But I would buy on Rhea and Dominik, I would rent on Chyna and Eddie, and I would sell on Beth and Santino. And Vince from Hampton, Virginia. If Hulk Hogan never joined the NWO at Bash at the Beach, do you think the NWO would have still been a huge success, or would they have been fed to Hogan to run through and die to death shortly thereafter? Yeah, that sounds about right. No, the NWO would not have been a big success the way that it was if Hogan wasn't the third man. Right? There was talk of them going with Sting or Bret Hart. Right? If Bret Hart came in, Bret Hart's a WWF guy. Him coming in, right? That would have been big for a period of time. It still wouldn't have worked. Hogan was the right guy in the right place at the right time. Hogan was the biggest star to come out of that territory. He was the biggest star to come out of that promotion. Who knew that company and Vince McMahon better than Hulk Hogan? The idea that Hogan came into WCW and now he was almost like this mole in effect who was coming in from the other place, and now he was going to destroy this other company, right? That was kind of the basic concept here. It was a winning idea. And Hogan had been a babyface for so long, the idea of him now being a villain and going heel was like incomprehensible to so many people. So without Hogan, I'm trying to see if there was anybody else, but Savage, Sting, Luger, they brought Bret into the company. It just wasn't going to work with anybody else other than Hulk Hogan. Certainly not at the level that it did. It just doesn't work without Hogan being in that spot. And I think if it was anybody else, you're absolutely right. Hogan would have eventually come back, as he had been gone for a few months. He would have come back. And guess what? You think Hulk Hogan, if let's say they brought Bret Hart in, okay, to be the third man, if he was available, and they brought Bret Hart in to be the third man as part of the NWO with Hall and Nash, do you honestly believe that if Hulk Hogan came back and now he was going to feud, he was going to be the flag bearer for WCW against this evil invading faction, that he would have allowed the NWO to go over on him? That he would have allowed himself to be jobbed out and beaten up the way that everybody else was by the NWO for fucking 2.5 years? Right? Can you actually picture that in your head? Can you conceive of such a thing? Because I can't. There's no way. He would have beaten the NWO all by himself. He didn't even need any allies. It could have been Hulk Hogan against five members of the NWO. He would have beaten them all by himself. And then he would have posed and danced over their corpse.